He found her standing on the edge of a frozen bridge at 2 in the morning, barefoot in a snowstorm, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. She was asleep, and she was one step away from falling into the black river below. Ethan Brooks had 30 seconds to reach her before the ice beneath her feet gave way. But this wasn't a stranger. This was the woman his daughter called family. This was the woman he had been quietly falling for. The same woman the entire country had just turned against. If you want to know how a mechanic and a CEO ended up here, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. And let's begin. The muffler on the F-150 had been rattling for 3 days straight, and Ethan Brooks was fairly certain the owner had tried to fix it himself with duct tape and a YouTube video before finally bringing it in. He slid underneath the truck on the creeper, the cold concrete pressing through his coveralls, and stared up at the mess someone had made of the exhaust clamp. Stripped bolts, crooked brackets, a smear of what looked like bathroom caulk where the gasket should have been. "Beautiful," he muttered. "Talking to yourself again?" Ray called from the next bay over, not looking up from the diesel engine he was elbow-deep inside. "Talking to this truck. Somebody owes it an apology." Ray laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came easy in a shop where the radio was always too loud and the coffee was always too old. Ethan liked it here. He liked the noise, the grease, the weight of a wrench in his hand. There was honesty in mechanical work. An engine either ran or it didn't. You couldn't fake a repair. You couldn't charm a transmission into cooperating. You fixed the problem, or the truck didn't move, and there was a simplicity to that he hadn't found anywhere else in his life. He was 32, divorced by death, not by choice. Father to a 7-year-old girl who talked more than any 3 adults combined. Renter of a 2-bedroom house at the end of Maplewood Lane that had a slow leak under the kitchen sink he kept meaning to fix, and a backyard fence that leaned about 15 degrees to the left after last summer's storm. He was tired most days. Not the dramatic kind of tired people wrote songs about, just the ordinary kind. The kind where you set your alarm for 5:15, pack a lunchbox with a sandwich you barely taste, and spend 9 hours under vehicles that weighed more than your entire life savings. Then you drove home, helped your kid with math homework you half remembered, made dinner out of whatever was left in the fridge, read 2 chapters of a book about a talking dog, and fell asleep on the couch before the 10 o'clock news. It wasn't glamorous. But it was his. Brooks, the shop foreman, Dale, appeared in the bay door with a clipboard. "You good to stay an extra hour?" Keegan called out again. Ethan checked his watch, 3:40. Lily's bus dropped her at the neighbor's house at 4:15. Mrs. Huang watched her until 5 on regular days, but the woman had a dentist appointment today. She'd reminded him twice. "Can't today, Dale." "Kid." Dale nodded. He never argued about Lily. Most guys in the shop had families, and Dale, who had raised 4 boys mostly by himself after his wife left, understood what that one word meant. Kid. It meant everything else could wait. Ethan finished the muffler repair in 20 minutes, washed his hands with the orange pumice soap that never quite got all the black out from under his nails, clocked out, and walked across the gravel lot to his truck. A 2011 Chevy Silverado with 187,000 miles, a cracked taillight he'd been meaning to replace, and a car seat in the back that Lily had technically outgrown but refused to give up because it had a cup holder she liked. The drive home took 35 minutes if traffic cooperated. Today, it didn't. Construction on Route 9 had 1 lane down, and Ethan sat behind a concrete mixer for 12 minutes, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel and checking the clock every 45 seconds. He pulled onto Maplewood Lane at 4:22. Mrs. Huang's front door was already open. Lily was sitting on the porch steps with her backpack between her knees, a juice box in one hand, and a very serious expression on her face. "You're late," she said as he walked up. 7 minutes. 7 minutes is late." "You're right. I apologize." Apology accepted. She stood up, brushed off her jeans with the formality of a senator leaving a press conference, and marched toward their house. "I have a lot to tell you about today." "Yeah?" "Jackson put a lizard in Emma's lunchbox, and she screamed so loud the fire alarm almost went off." "Almost?" "Almost. But Mrs. Davis said if it had gone off, we'd all have to evacuate, and Jackson would probably go to jail." "I don't think second graders go to jail, Lily." "They should. He's a menace." Ethan bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. He thanked Mrs. Huang through the screen door, grabbed Lily's hand, and they walked the 40 feet to their own front porch. The house was small, white paint that was more gray than white, a roof that needed new shingles on the south side. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with yellow cabinets from the 1970s, and a living room barely big enough for a couch, a TV, and the bookshelf Ethan had built last winter out of scrap wood from the shop. The landlord, Mr. Castellano, was 78 and lived in Florida and had promised to fix the porch railing before the next ice storm, which was the same promise he'd made before the last 3 ice storms. But it was clean. It was warm. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator and most of one hallway wall. There was a framed photo of Ethan's wife, Claire, on the bookshelf, a picture from their honeymoon in the Outer Banks, her hair blowing sideways, laughing at something he couldn't remember saying. Lily looked at it every day. Sometimes she talked to it. "Mom, I got a 92 on my spelling test," she'd say, standing on her toes to be closer to the frame. "I missed necessary. It has 2 S's, and I only put 1. Ethan never interrupted those moments. He'd stand in the kitchen doorway and listen, and something in his chest would tighten in a way he'd stop trying to name. Claire had been gone 4 years. Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed too late, treated too aggressively, lost too fast. She was 26. Lily was 3 and didn't understand why Mommy stopped coming home. Ethan was 28 and understood exactly why, but couldn't make himself accept it. The grief had flattened him for about 8 months. He'd gone through the motions: work, childcare, groceries, laundry. But he'd done it all with the emotional range of a shopping cart, rolling forward because the ground was sloped, not because he had anywhere to go. Eventually, Lily pulled him out of it, not with some cinematic moment or a tearful speech, but with the relentless, exhausting, beautiful demands of being 7. She needed breakfast. She needed her hair brushed. She needed someone to explain why the sky was blue and whether dogs could see color and what happened if you dug a hole all the way through the earth. She needed him to be there. So he was. That was the deal Ethan had made with himself, standing in the hospital parking lot at 3 in the morning after Claire's last breath. He wasn't going to be a great father. He didn't know how. But he was going to be present. Every single day, no exceptions. He'd kept that promise for 4 years. It was the only thing about himself he was genuinely proud of. The house next door had been vacant for 2 months before the moving trucks showed up. Ethan noticed them on a Saturday morning in early September, right around the time he was trying to fix the garbage disposal with a YouTube tutorial and a flathead screwdriver while Lily narrated his failures from a kitchen stool. "That's not what the video said to do." "I know. He said turn it counterclockwise." "I am turning it counterclockwise." "That's clockwise, Dad." Ethan looked at the screwdriver. She was right. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." Then Lily's attention snapped to the window. Trucks. 2 large moving trucks had backed into the driveway next door, and a crew of movers in matching gray uniforms was unloading furniture that looked nothing like anything on Maplewood Lane. Ethan caught a glimpse of something white and angular that might have been a designer couch, followed by what was definitely an enormous mirror in a gold frame. "Fancy," Lily said. "Don't stare." "I'm observing. That's different." Ethan didn't see the new neighbor until late that afternoon. He was in the yard pulling weeds from the sad patch of dirt Lily called a garden when a black sedan pulled into the driveway next door. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was about 30, maybe a year or 2 younger. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably wasn't. A tailored coat, heels that were completely wrong for the cracked driveway, and sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. She stood there for a moment, looking at the house the way someone might look at a hotel they'd booked online and were now seeing for the first time. Not impressed, not disappointed, just calculating. Then she noticed Ethan staring. He realized he was still holding a clump of dandelions with dirt falling between his fingers. "Hi," he said. Brilliant opening. "Hello." She gave a small nod and walked inside without another word. He learned her name 3 days later from Mrs. Huang, who had learned it from the mail carrier. Sophia Laurent. "The tech woman," Mrs. Huang said over the fence, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I saw her on the news once. She runs that company, the one with the app everyone uses. Ethan didn't know which app everyone used. He had roughly 4 apps on his phone, the one for calling people, the one for texting people, the weather, and a game Lily had downloaded that he couldn't figure out how to delete. Okay, he said. She's very successful, Mrs. Huang pressed. That's nice. And single. Good talk, Mrs. Huang. He went inside and thought nothing more about it. Rich people moved to quiet streets sometimes. It didn't mean anything. They'd nod at each other across the driveway, maybe wave once or twice, and that would be the extent of it. Neighbors, not friends. That was how it worked with people who lived in different worlds. Lily, however, had other plans. The cookie incident happened on the 4th day. Ethan came home from work to find Lily in the kitchen with flour on her face, chocolate chips in her hair, and a plate of cookies that looked like they'd survived a minor earthquake. Who are these for? The lady next door. What? She looks sad, Dad. Sad people need cookies. You don't even know her. That's the whole point. You give cookies to people you don't know yet. That's how you know them after. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, realized there was no logical flaw in her reasoning, and closed it again. Fine, but I'm coming with you. They walked over together. Lily carried the plate with both hands, her tongue poking out in concentration. Ethan rang the doorbell and waited, suddenly aware that he was still wearing his work coveralls with Brooks stitched on the chest, and that there was a grease stain on his left knee that had been there for approximately 7 weeks. The door opened. Sophia stood there in a silk blouse and black pants, her phone pressed against her shoulder, mid-conversation. Her eyes went to Ethan first, then dropped to Lily, and something in her expression shifted. Not a smile exactly. Something closer to surprise. Hi, Lily said. I'm Lily. I live there. She pointed at their house. I made you cookies because you look sad. They're chocolate chip, but some of them are kind of flat because the oven is weird. Sophia blinked. Then she slowly lowered the phone from her shoulder and said something into it that Ethan couldn't hear before ending the call. You made these yourself? She asked. My dad helped a little, but mostly me. Mostly her, Ethan confirmed. I handled the oven part, and the cleanup part, and the part where we ran out of sugar and had to improvise. Sophia looked at him. For the first time, he saw something besides composure in her face. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. She was tired, not the kind of tired he felt after a long shift. Something deeper, like someone who had been running for a very long time and was only now realizing she'd forgotten why. Thank you, she said to Lily. They look perfect. They're not perfect, Lily corrected. That one's burnt on the bottom, but my dad says burnt parts build character. A sound came from Sophia that might have been a laugh. It was brief and quiet, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to make it. Tell your dad he's right, she said. That was it. That was the first real conversation. 16 sentences and a plate of uneven cookies. But the next morning, when Lily was walking to the bus stop, she looked over and saw Sophia standing at her kitchen window with a coffee cup. Lily waved, Sophia waved back, and the morning after that, and the one after that, it became a thing. Over the next several weeks, Sophia appeared at the edges of Ethan and Lily's life the way furniture appears in a room you're slowly moving into. One piece at a time, nothing dramatic, until one day you look around and realize the space has completely changed. It started with borrowed things. A cup of sugar, a screwdriver, a phone charger Sophia needed because she'd left hers at the office, and her phone was at 2%, and she had a conference call in 10 minutes. Come in, Ethan had said, stepping aside. She stood in his kitchen with its yellow cabinets and cluttered counter and Lily's drawings on the fridge, and she looked around as though she'd walked into some kind of museum exhibit she couldn't quite categorize. Your house is nice, she said carefully. It's small. I didn't say it was big. I said it was nice. He handed her the charger. She plugged in her phone, made her call standing by the window with her back very straight, and her voice very controlled, and used phrases like stakeholder alignment and quarterly trajectory that made Ethan feel like he was accidentally listening to a foreign language. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, staring out the window at the yard where Lily's bicycle lay on its side in the grass. Thank you, she said. Any time. She looked at him. People say that. They don't usually mean it. I mean it. Something passed between them then. Not romantic, not even particularly warm. More like recognition. Two people standing in a small kitchen, both carrying things too heavy to talk about, both pretending they weren't tired. She left. She came back the next day for a different reason, and the day after that. Lily, of course, accelerated the timeline. She had no concept of boundaries, social protocol, or the invisible walls adults built between themselves and other adults. She just walked through them. Sophia, do you want to see my rock collection? Sophia, did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts? Sophia, my dad is making spaghetti and he always makes too much, so you should come over. Ethan would look at Sophia apologetically every time, ready to translate his daughter's invitations into something less aggressive. But Sophia never said no. She'd come over, sit at the kitchen table, eat spaghetti from the same mismatched plates they used every night, and listen to Lily's running commentary on the state of the world with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something Ethan couldn't identify. Later, after Lily was asleep, he'd find Sophia sitting on his porch steps, staring at nothing. "You okay?" he asked one night, handing her a cup of coffee he'd made without asking if she wanted one. She took it, held it with both hands. The October air had gone cold, and she was wearing one of those coats that probably cost more than his truck payment, but didn't seem to actually keep her warm. "Long day," she said. "Want to talk about it?" "No." "Okay." They sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then she said, "Thank you," and went home. That was the pattern. She came. She stayed a little while. She said almost nothing about her own life. She absorbed the warmth of his house and his daughter like someone pressing cold hands against a heating vent, and then she left. Ethan didn't push. He didn't ask about the company she ran or the meetings she took at midnight or the town car that picked her up at 6 in the morning and didn't bring her back until 10 at night. He figured she had 1,000 people asking her questions all day. She didn't need another one. But he noticed things. The first thing he noticed was that she never slept. Not never. Nobody survives on no sleep, but close enough to worry about. Her kitchen light was on at 2 in the morning, at 3, at 4. Sometimes he'd get up to check on Lily and see Sophia's silhouette through the window, standing in her living room, not moving, just standing there in the blue light of a laptop screen. The second thing he noticed was that she ate almost nothing. Lily had started bringing her food, leftover casserole, peanut butter sandwiches, slices of the banana bread Ethan made on Sunday mornings. And Sophia accepted everything graciously but rarely finished any of it. The third thing he noticed was the way she looked when she thought nobody was watching. Empty. Not sad, exactly. Empty. Like someone had unplugged something behind her eyes, and what was left was just the machine running on backup power, performing all the correct functions but generating no actual warmth. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own bathroom mirror for 8 months after Claire died. One evening in late October, Sophia came over for dinner, and Lily insisted on showing her the Halloween costume Ethan had been building for 2 weeks. It was a dragon. A ridiculous, beautiful, completely impractical dragon made out of cardboard, green paint, and approximately 6 rolls of aluminum foil. "Put it on! Put it on!" Lily squealed and struggled into the wings while Ethan held the tailpiece steady. Sophia watched from the couch. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her jaw was tight. "What do you think?" Lily asked, spreading the wings and knocking a lamp off the end table. "I think," Sophia said carefully, "that you have a very good father." Something in her voice cracked on the last word. It was barely perceptible, a hairline fracture in the smooth surface she presented to the world. But Ethan caught it. After Lily went to bed, he found Sophia in the kitchen, washing dishes she hadn't been asked to wash. "Hey," he said, "you don't have to do that." "I want to." He leaned against the counter. She scrubbed a plate that was already clean. "Sophia," she kept scrubbing, "when's the last time you slept more than 3 hours?" The scrubbing stopped. She held the plate under the running water, not moving, staring at the faucet. "I manage," she said. "That's not what I asked." She set the plate down, turned off the water, stood there with her hands on the edge of the sink, her shoulders rigid, her breath a little too controlled. I don't sleep well, she said. I haven't for a while. It's not a big deal. Okay. It's really not. I said okay. She looked at him sideways. You're doing that thing where you say okay, but your face says you don't believe me. My face is just my face. Your face is very expressive for a mechanic. He almost smiled. So did she. Almost. Go home, he said gently. Try to sleep. I will. She didn't. Her light was on all night. He knew because his was too. November arrived cold and fast. The leaves dropped overnight, the heating bill went up, and Lily started rehearsals for the school Thanksgiving play, which required Ethan to construct a pilgrim hat out of construction paper and explain what a pilgrim was, which required him to Google what a pilgrim was, which led to a 30-minute conversation about colonialism that neither of them was prepared for. Were the pilgrims the good guys or the bad guys? Lily asked. It's complicated. Everything grown-ups say is complicated usually isn't. He let that one sit. Sophia had been coming over more frequently. 3 nights a week became 4, then 5. She'd bring wine she barely touched and sit on the couch while Lily did homework on the floor and Ethan pretended to read the newspaper on his phone. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. The silence between them had changed. It had gone from awkward to comfortable without either of them marking the transition. But the cracks in Sophia's composure were widening. She'd started losing track of conversations mid-sentence. She'd be talking about something, a meeting, a project, a detail from her day, and then stop, staring at a spot on the wall, her mouth slightly open, her eyes somewhere else entirely. Sophia. Sorry, what was I saying? Something about the quarterly report. Right. She'd shake her head and pick back up, but the thread was gone. She was performing memory, not using it. She also started arriving later. 9 o'clock, 10. One night she knocked on the door at 11:15. Ethan opened it in sweatpants and a t-shirt, and she stood on the porch, looking like someone who had just driven 2 hours to arrive at a destination she couldn't remember choosing. I know it's late, she said. It's fine. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I didn't want to go inside my house. He stepped aside. She came in. She sat on the couch and pulled a blanket over her legs. Lily's blanket, the one with cartoon owls on it. And she sat there, staring at the dark TV screen, not speaking. He made her tea. He sat at the other end of the couch. He didn't ask what was wrong because he could feel, in the specific weight of the silence, that she couldn't answer that question yet. So he just sat there. 2 people in a small living room, breathing. She fell asleep around midnight. It was the first time he'd seen her actually sleep. Her head tipped against the armrest, her breathing finally slow and even, her face losing all the tension she carried during waking hours. She looked younger. She looked like someone who hadn't been running a company or fighting investors or pretending the world wasn't trying to chew her up. He covered her with a second blanket and went to bed. In the morning, she was gone. The blankets were folded neatly on the couch, and there was a note on the kitchen counter in handwriting so precise it could have been printed. Thank you. S. He put the note in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the dead batteries and the crayon drawings Lily had outgrown. It stayed there for a long time. Yet, the week before Thanksgiving, Ethan was awakened at 2 a.m. by a sound he couldn't place. He lay in bed for a moment, listening. The house was quiet. Lily's nightlight glowed from down the hall. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows in the uneven way it did when a cold front was moving through. Then he heard it again. Not a noise from inside the house. From outside. A voice. Low, rhythmic, almost like chanting but without any melody. He got up, went to the window. The backyard was dark except for the motion light above the garage, which clicked on and off in the wind. He looked toward the street. Sophia was standing on the sidewalk in front of his house. She was barefoot, wearing a thin nightgown, the kind that offered nothing against the November cold. Her arms were at her sides. Her eyes were open. But she wasn't awake. He'd seen Sleepwalking before. His college roommate used to wander the dorm hallways at 2 a.m, bumping into walls and mumbling about baseball. But this was different. Sophia wasn't bumbling or disoriented. She was walking with purpose, her steps careful and measured, her lips moving in a quiet, continuous stream of words he couldn't make out. He pulled on shoes, grabbed his jacket, and went outside. The cold hit him immediately. It was well below freezing, and the concrete was icy under his boots. "Sophia," he said quietly, keeping his distance. He remembered reading somewhere that you weren't supposed to wake sleepwalkers suddenly. She didn't respond. She kept walking slowly toward the end of the street. Her feet were bare on the frozen sidewalk. The thin fabric of her nightgown moved in the wind. He caught up to her and walked alongside her, close but not touching, trying to hear what she was saying. Is she... Cool. The projections were accurate. You know they were accurate. Why would he say that in front of the board? He knew what it would do. He knew. He planned it. He always plans it. Just like my father. Just like... Her voice broke. She stopped walking, stood in the middle of the sidewalk, barefoot, trembling, and whispered a name he couldn't hear. Then she turned around and started walking back toward her house, still asleep, still murmuring, her feet leaving damp prints on the icy concrete. Ethan followed her home. He watched her walk up her porch steps. She navigated them perfectly, as though the sleeping part of her brain had memorized the layout, and go through her front door, which she'd apparently left unlocked. He stood outside for a long time after the door closed, watching her shadow move through the house before the lights went dark. He went home. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he debated whether to say anything. It felt invasive, like he'd accidentally seen something private that she hadn't chosen to show him. But her feet had been bare on frozen concrete, and the temperature was dropping, and he kept thinking about what would have happened if she'd walked toward the main road instead of the sidewalk. He found her in her driveway that afternoon, getting out of her car. She looked normal, dressed, composed, the executive version of herself that existed between her front door and the rest of the world. "Hey," he said, walking over. "Can I talk to you for a second?" She looked at him with the pleasant, neutral expression she used for people she didn't yet know what to do with. "Of course. Last night, around 2, you were outside, walking." The expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "I was asleep," she said. It wasn't a question. "You were on the sidewalk, barefoot. It was about 20 degrees out." She closed her car door, stood very still. He watched the mask she wore for the world tighten almost imperceptibly. "How long?" he asked. "How long what? How long has this been happening?" She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of dead leaves and exhaust from the main road. "A few months," she said finally. "It started after my father died." Ethan waited. "He built the company," she continued, and her voice had the careful, measured quality of someone reciting facts to keep emotions at arm's length. "Laurent Technologies, from nothing. He started it in his garage when I was 8 years old. By the time I was in college, it was worth $200 million. She paused, looked at her house, looked back at him. "He died 14 months ago. Heart attack at his desk. I inherited the company, the board seat, the investors, the lawsuits, the partnerships, and about 40 people who had been waiting for him to die so they could take what he built." She smiled, and the smile was the coldest thing Ethan had ever seen. "I've been fighting them ever since." "And the sleepwalking?" "Started about 3 months in. I don't remember any of it. I just wake up in different rooms or outside, or once in my car with the engine running." She said this the way someone might describe a weather pattern, distant, clinical, unattached. "My doctor gave me medication. It doesn't always work." "Sophia, you were standing on the sidewalk in the freezing cold, in a nightgown, at 2 in the morning." "I know. That's dangerous." "I know that too." "Okay, but do you know it the way where you actually do something about it? Or do you know it the way where you file it away and pretend it doesn't count?" She looked at him. For a moment the mask slipped, and underneath it he saw something raw. Not anger, not sadness, but exhaustion so complete it had become its own kind of gravity, pulling everything inward, collapsing her into herself. "I'm handling it," she said. "You're not. You don't know that. I found you sleepwalking on a frozen sidewalk at 2 in the morning, whispering about someone betraying you. That's not handled." The silence between them felt different than the comfortable ones on his couch. This one had edges. "I appreciate your concern," she said, and the words were so carefully constructed, so perfectly polished, that they might as well have been a wall going up. I'm not concerned as a neighbor, Ethan said. I'm concerned as someone who... He stopped. Wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. As someone who cares about you? As someone who watches your light stay on all night and worries? As someone whose daughter has already decided you're part of our family, whether you've agreed to it or not? As someone who's seen what happens when people try to carry everything alone, he said quietly. It doesn't end well. I know, because I tried it. She stared at him. The wind picked up. A car passed on the main road, its headlights sweeping across the houses. If it happens again, she said, and you're awake, you can... She swallowed. You can bring me back inside. It wasn't much. It wasn't vulnerability, not really. It was a concession, a crack in the door barely wide enough to see through. Okay, he said. She nodded once, turned, and walked inside. That night, he set an alarm for 1:30. He sat by the window in the dark, watching her house, drinking cold coffee from a mug Lily had painted at a birthday party. At 2:17, her front door opened. He put on his shoes and went outside. She was walking again, same direction, same rhythm, same stream of quiet words that tumbled out of her sleeping mind like debris from a building that was slowly falling apart from the inside. He walked beside her, not touching, not speaking, just present. When she turned toward the road, he gently redirected her toward her house. When she reached her porch, he opened the door and guided her inside. She walked to her couch and lay down, still asleep, still murmuring. He found a blanket in her living room. Everything in her house was white and chrome and expensive and cold, and covered her with it. He locked her front door and went home. In the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't have saved. Was it bad last night? He saved her number and typed back, You walked for about 10 minutes. I brought you home. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Thank you, Ethan. He stared at his name on the screen. It was the first time she'd used it. Anytime, he wrote back. And this time, he was sure she knew he meant it. It became their unspoken arrangement. Every night, somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, Ethan's phone alarm would pull him from whatever shallow sleep he'd managed, and he'd sit by the bedroom window with the lights off, watching Sophia's house through the gap in the curtains. Most nights, nothing happened. Her windows stayed dark, her front door stayed closed, and he'd fall back asleep in the chair with his neck at an angle that would punish him all through his shift the next day. But 2 or 3 nights a week, the door would open. He got faster at reading the signs. If her porch light flickered, she'd bump the switch on her way out, still unconscious. If the motion sensor above her garage tripped, she'd turned left instead of right and was heading toward the backyard. If the neighborhood dog started barking in sequence down the street, she'd made it past the mailboxes and was moving toward the intersection. Each time, he went out. Each time, he walked beside her without touching, listening to the fractured monologue that spilled from her sleeping mind like water from a cracked pipe. Names he didn't recognize, numbers that sounded like financial projections, fragments of arguments she was replaying in some deep, unreachable theater of her subconscious. And always, always, her father's name. Thomas. Sometimes whispered, sometimes spoken with a kind of desperate tenderness that made Ethan's chest ache. Dad, they're going to take it. They're going to take everything you built, and I don't know how to... He'd guide her home, cover her with a blanket, lock her door, go back to his own house and sit in the kitchen until his hands stopped shaking. He never told her exactly what she said during the episodes. She asked once, the morning after a particularly long walk that had taken them almost to the elementary school 3 blocks away. Was I talking? A little. What did I say? He looked at her across his kitchen table. She was holding a coffee mug with both hands, her hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. She'd shown up at his door at 6:30 in the morning, which was new. Usually she texted. Today she'd just appeared standing on his porch in a sweatshirt that was too big for her, looking like someone who had been crying and was now finished with it and didn't want to discuss it. Nothing that made a lot of sense, he said. Mostly work stuff. Work stuff. Yeah. She searched his face. He kept it neutral. She didn't need to know about the way she'd stood at the corner of Maplewood and Birch, trembling in the cold, whispering, "I'm sorry, Dad," over and over, until her voice went hoarse. "Okay," she said. She didn't believe him. She also didn't push. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, saw Sophia at the table, and reacted as though this were the most normal thing in the world. "Good morning, Sophia. Do you want toast? Dad makes it too dark, but you can scrape the burnt parts off." "I'd love some toast. Also, I have a question. Do you think dogs dream?" "I think they probably do." "About what?" "Running, maybe, chasing things." "That makes sense." Lily climbed onto her chair and propped her chin on her hands. "I dreamed about a fish that could talk last night. It was rude, though. It said my shoes were ugly." Sophia looked at Lily with an expression Ethan had never seen on her face before. Not amusement, although there was some of that. Something softer, something unguarded. The kind of look a person gives when they've been in the dark for a long time, and someone opens a door and the light doesn't hurt their eyes. It just makes them realize how long they've been sitting in the dark. "Your shoes aren't ugly," Sophia said. "I know, the fish was wrong about a lot of things." Ethan turned back to the toaster. He pressed the lever down and stood there listening to his daughter and this woman talk about a rude dreamfish, and he thought, this is the most fragile thing I've ever been part of. Because whatever this was, whatever Sophia was allowing herself to have by showing up at his house at 6:30 in the morning without calling first, it was held together with almost nothing. Thread and hope, and the kind of trust that could snap at any moment if someone pulled too hard. He was careful not to pull. December came in mean. A cold snap dropped temperatures into the single digits, and the pipes in Ethan's kitchen froze at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday. He spent an hour under the sink with a hairdryer and a lot of swearing that he kept under his breath because Lily had inherited Claire's ability to hear profanity from 3 rooms away. Sophia knocked on his door at 7 that morning, dressed for work, a town car idling in the street behind her. "Your pipes froze," she said, not a question. "How'd you know?" "I heard you through the wall." "Heard me doing what?" "Whispering words that would get Lily suspended from school." He laughed. She almost did. That almost laugh was happening more often now. Not quite breaking through, but getting closer each time, like a plant pushing against concrete. "I can call someone," she said. "A plumber. I have a guy." "You have a plumber guy." "I have a guy for most things." "I don't need a plumber. I fixed it. With a hairdryer. It worked." She looked at him the way she sometimes did, like she was trying to solve him, the way she solved business problems by breaking him into components and analyzing each one. The coveralls, the grease-stained hands, the house that was falling apart in small, manageable ways that he patched with ingenuity and stubbornness instead of money. "You're very stubborn," she said. "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one. The driver honked once politely. Sophia glanced back at the car, then at Ethan. "I might be late tonight," she said, and the way she said it, casually, like someone telling a spouse they'd missed dinner, landed between them with a weight neither acknowledged. "I'll leave the porch light on," he said. She turned and walked toward the car. Halfway there, she stopped. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "The pipes will freeze again if you don't insulate them. There's heat tape at the hardware store. Wrap the exposed sections and plug it in." "Are you giving me plumbing advice?" "I'm giving you advice that will prevent you from spending another morning whispering obscenities at your kitchen sink." She got in the car. He stood on the porch and watched it pull away, and he realized he was smiling, which was a thing that had been happening more often lately, and which he hadn't fully examined because examining it felt dangerous. She came over that night at 9. Lily was already asleep. Sophia sat on the couch with a glass of wine she barely touched, and for the first time, she talked. Not about the company, not about work or investors or board meetings, about her father. "He used to make pancakes on Sundays," she said, staring at the wine in her glass. "Terrible pancakes, burnt on the outside, raw in the middle. He was a genius with circuit boards, but completely helpless in a kitchen." Ethan sat at the other end of the couch, his feet on the coffee table that Lily had decorated with star stickers. "My wife was like that," he said. "She once set off the smoke alarm making oatmeal." "How?" I still don't know. Oatmeal shouldn't be flammable. Sophia's mouth twitched. Your wife, Claire. Lily told you. Lily tells me everything. She said her mom was pretty and smart and that she could whistle really loud with 2 fingers. That's all true. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Lily also said you don't talk about her much. Ethan looked at the photo on the bookshelf. Claire in the Outer Banks, hair sideways, laughing. There's not much to say that isn't sad, he said, and Lily gets enough sad from the world without me adding to it. That's, Sophia started, then stopped, recalibrated. That's a very lonely way to grieve. Maybe. It is. How would you know? The question came out sharper than he intended. Sophia didn't flinch. She just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that could stare down a boardroom full of hostile investors without blinking. Because I do the same thing, she said. My father died and I didn't take a single day off. I went to work the next morning. I wore the same suit I'd worn to the hospital. I sat in his chair and I answered his emails and I told the board everything was fine. And I've been saying that every day for 14 months and nothing has been fine. The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the empty trees with a sound like someone sighing. Why don't you stop? He asked. Stop what? All of it. The company, the board, the investors. If it's killing you, why don't you walk away? She set her wine glass on the coffee table, sat back against the cushions, folded her arms. It was a defensive posture, and she probably knew it. Because it's his, she said. Everything I have is because he built it. The money, the reputation, the company, the name. If I let them take it, then what was the point? What was any of it for? He spent 30 years building something, and I'm supposed to just hand it to the people who spent 30 years trying to steal it? No. But you're also supposed to be alive when it's over. She looked at him. He looked back. The weight of what he'd said settled between them like something heavy being placed carefully on a table that might not hold it. I'm alive, she said. Barely. That counts. No, it doesn't. Mao, she didn't argue. She picked up her wine glass, took a single sip, and set it back down. My business partner, she said. Marcus Webb. He was my father's protege. He worked with him for 15 years. When my father died, Marcus told me he'd help me run the company, that we were in this together, that he'd protect what my father built. And 3 months later, I found discrepancies in the financial records. Small ones at first, line items that didn't match, invoices from vendors that didn't exist, transfers to accounts I'd never seen. I thought it was a mistake. Marcus said it was a mistake. He said the accounting team was overwhelmed after the transition and things had slipped through. She paused. Her jaw tightened. I believed him. For weeks I believed him. Because I wanted to. Because he'd been at every holiday dinner, every birthday, every company milestone for my entire life. He was practically family. What changed? I found an email. An old one, from 2 years before my father died. Marcus to an outside investor. The subject line was succession timeline. The email outlined a plan to restructure the board, dilute my father's shares, and position Marcus as the majority stakeholder once my father was, his words, no longer a factor. Ethan felt his hands tighten on the arm of the couch. No longer a factor, Sophia repeated. He was talking about my father dying, 2 years before it happened. He was planning for it, waiting for it. Did you confront him? Not yet, because the email wasn't enough. One email proves one conversation, not a conspiracy. I need more. I need the full picture, and the only way to get it is to stay inside the company and dig without anyone knowing I'm digging. That's what the 3 weeks were, Ethan said. It landed, and he saw her stiffen slightly. What 3 weeks? Lily asked where you were. You were gone for almost 3 weeks. No car, no lights, no nothing. She left cookies on your porch every day, and they sat there until the ants found them. Sophia closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted. Not the mask, the thing underneath it. I went through my father's files, she said. Everything, every email, every contract, every handwritten note and every margin of every document he ever signed. I found things, Ethan. I found enough to know that Marcus wasn't just stealing money. He was systematically erasing my father's legacy and replacing it with his own. You have to go public with this. I can't. Not yet. The evidence isn't organized. Half of it is in my father's shorthand that only I can read, and Marcus has the board on his side. If I make accusations without proof, they'll call me unstable and remove me. And the sleepwalking? She was quiet for a long time. It started the night I came home from going through those files. I woke up in my car at 4 in the morning, parked in my father's old driveway. The house had been sold 8 months earlier. I was sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off, and I had no memory of driving there. She looked at her hands. That was the first time. It's gotten worse. Sophia. I know. You need help. I know that too. Real help, not just me walking you home at 2 in the morning. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw fear in her eyes. Not the calculated concern of a CEO evaluating risk. Actual fear. The kind of person feels when they've been alone with something terrifying and someone finally sees it. I'm scared, she said, not of Marcus, not of losing the company. I'm scared of what's happening to me. I'm scared that one night I'm going to walk somewhere I can't come back from and no one will be there to bring me home. Ethan moved closer on the couch. Not all the way, just enough to close some of the distance between them. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her hand or put his arm around her or do any of the things that people do in movies when someone breaks open. He just sat there, close enough that she could feel he was real, and said the only thing he knew was true. I'll be there. You can't promise that. I just did. Ethan, you have Lily. You have your own life. You can't spend every night watching my house like some kind of... I already am. She stopped, stared at him. Every night? She asked. Most nights. I set an alarm, 1:30. For how long? Since the first time I found you on the sidewalk. Something happened to her face then. It was like watching a wall develop a crack that started small and spread in every direction at once. Her chin trembled, her eyes filled. She pressed a hand over her mouth and turned away from him, and the sound that came out of her was not a sob, not exactly. It was more like the sound of a lock breaking after being forced for too long. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stayed where he was, close enough to matter, far enough to respect whatever she needed the distance for. After a minute, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and exhaled in a way that shook her entire body. Why? She whispered. Why what? Why do you care? You barely know me. I know enough. You know I'm a mess. I know you show up at my house at 6:30 in the morning because you don't want to be alone. I know you sit on my couch and listen to my daughter talk about dreamfish and your whole face changes. I know you're fighting something massive by yourself and you haven't quit, even though it would be easier. That's not a mess, Sophia. That's a person. She looked at him. The mask was gone. Whatever she usually wore between herself and the world, the composure, the precision, the cool authority, had been set aside, and what was underneath was just a woman who was exhausted and frightened and holding together by less than anyone could see. I don't know how to accept help, she said. I know. That's why I'm not asking. She almost laughed. It was closer this time than it had ever been. Not quite a sound, but her mouth moved and her eyes changed, and for a fraction of a second she looked like someone who remembered what it felt like to be okay. They sat on the couch until almost midnight. She talked about her father. Not the CEO, not the legacy, but the man who burned pancakes and taught her to ride a bike by running behind her in dress shoes. Ethan talked about Claire, not the illness, not the hospital, but the woman who could whistle with 2 fingers and who once convinced a police officer that she was late for a pizza delivery and got out of a speeding ticket. They laughed a few times, quietly, so they wouldn't wake Lily. When Sophia left, she paused at the door. 1:30, she said. What? Your alarm. Set it for 1:30. I already told you. I know, I'm saying it. Keep doing it, please. He nodded. She walked across the yard to her house. He watched her go inside. The light came on in her kitchen, then went off. For the first time in weeks, it stayed off. He went to bed. He set the alarm. At 1:30, he got up and checked the window. Her door was closed. Her house was dark. She was still inside. He sat in the chair anyway, watching, because that was the promise he'd made. Not because she asked, not because she needed him to, because some things you do for people aren't about what's reasonable or logical or fair. They're about what you can live with if you don't do them. And Ethan already knew what it felt like to not be there when it mattered. He wasn't going to learn that lesson twice. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning 3 days before Christmas. Ethan was under a Kenworth at the shop, replacing a cracked oil pan, when his phone buzzed in his coverall pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Then continuously, like something was broken. He slid out from under the truck and checked the screen. 7 text messages from Sophia, all sent within 90 seconds. The first one said, "It's happening." The second, "Marcus leaked everything." The third was a link to a news article. The headline read, "Laurent Technologies CEO accused of financial fraud. Former partner reveals evidence of embezzlement and cover-up." The fourth message said, "He flipped it. He took everything I found and made it look like I did it." The fifth, "The board called an emergency meeting." The sixth, "Reporters are outside my office." The seventh was just 3 words, "I can't breathe." Ethan stared at the screen. Around him, the shop carried on. Compressors hissing, Ray arguing with the transmission, the radio playing something by Tom Petty. And none of it registered. He read the messages again. Then he called her. It rang 5 times. She picked up, but didn't speak. He could hear noise in the background. Voices, lots of them, overlapping and urgent. And underneath all of it, her breathing, fast and shallow, the kind that comes right before the body decides it's had enough. "Sophia, where are you?" "My office." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "There are cameras, outside the building, in the lobby. Someone from the board already released a statement calling for my resignation." "Are you safe?" "I'm in my office with the door locked. Stay there. I'm coming." "You're at work." "I'm coming." He hung up, found Dale in the front office, and said 2 words he'd never said in 5 years at the shop. "Family emergency." Dale looked at his face and didn't ask a single question, just nodded and said, "Go." The drive to Laurent Technologies took 40 minutes. The building was a glass tower on the north side of the city, the kind of place that looked like it had been designed to intimidate rather than function. Ethan had never been there. He'd never been invited. The world Sophia occupied from 9 to 9 was as foreign to him as the underside of a Kenworth would have been to her. He parked 2 blocks away because the street in front of the building was clogged with news vans. 3 camera crews were set up on the sidewalk, and a cluster of reporters stood near the main entrance, waiting. He walked past them with his head down, his coveralls still streaked with oil, and pushed through a side entrance he found near the loading dock. Inside, the building was chaos wearing a suit. People in expensive clothes walked quickly through corridors, speaking into phones with the controlled urgency of air traffic controllers. Nobody looked at Ethan. A mechanic in dirty coveralls was invisible in a building like this. He didn't match the pattern, so he didn't register. He took an elevator to the 14th floor, which was the number Sophia had mentioned once during a conversation he hadn't realized he was memorizing. The doors opened onto a hallway with glass walls and gray carpet and the kind of silence that comes from everyone in a room trying not to be the first to speak. A woman at a desk near the corner office looked up at him with an expression that suggested he was either lost or insane. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Sophia Laurent." "Ms. Laurent isn't taking visitors." "She's expecting me." "Sir, I don't think—" The office door opened. Sophia stood in the frame, and for a moment Ethan almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different. She was wearing the same kind of tailored clothes, the same heels, the same pulled-back hair, but because the thing that usually held all of it together was gone. The composure. The architecture of calm she built around herself every morning like a wall. It had collapsed, and what was left was a woman standing in a doorway gripping the handle so hard her knuckles were white. "He's with me," she said to the assistant. The woman looked at Ethan's coveralls, then at Sophia, then back at Ethan. She said nothing. Ethan walked into the office. Sophia closed the door behind him and locked it. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk the size of a small boat, bookshelves lined with awards and framed photographs. On the desk, A laptop screen displayed a news article with Sophia's face next to a headline that included the word fraud. She stood with her back against the door, arms folded, chin up, jaw tight, holding herself together through sheer mechanical force. "Tell me," he said. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the city below. "Marcus went to the press last night. He gave them a version of the financial records, doctored, edited, rearranged, that makes it look like I've been embezzling from the company since my father died. Skimming from investor accounts, funneling money into shell companies, everything he actually did, except with my name on it instead of his." "Can you prove that?" "I have the originals, the real records, the ones that show his name, his accounts, his signatures. But it doesn't matter right now because the story is already out. 3 major outlets picked it up before I woke up this morning. The stock dropped 14% in pre-market trading. 2 of our biggest investors called to pull their funding before the markets even opened." "What about the board?" She turned around. Her eyes were dry, but there was something behind them that looked like it was burning. "The board held an emergency vote at 8 this morning. I wasn't invited. Marcus was. They voted to suspend me as CEO pending an independent investigation." "They can do that?" "They can do whatever the majority votes for. And Marcus has been building that majority for over a year. Every dinner, every golf game, every quiet conversation in the hallway. He was lining up votes. I just didn't see it because I was too busy trying to keep the company alive." Ethan leaned against the edge of her desk. Below the window, he could see the news vans, small from this height, lined up like ants at a picnic. "What do you need?" he asked. She stared at him. "What?" "Right now. What do you need? Not what's the strategy, not what's the plan. What do you need in the next 5 minutes?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Her arms, still folded, tightened against her body. "I need to not be here," she said. "Then let's go." "I can't just leave. There are reporters downstairs. If I walk out now, every camera in the city, side entrance, loading dock. I parked 2 blocks away." She looked at him. He could see the calculation happening. The CEO part of her brain weighing optics, strategy, the message it would send if she disappeared from the building during a crisis. And he could see the exact moment the other part of her, the part that hadn't slept in 3 days and was barely holding together, won. "Okay," she said. They went down the service elevator, through a concrete corridor that smelled like cleaning supplies, past a confused janitor who nodded at them without asking questions, out through the loading dock into the cold December air. Sophia was wearing heels and no coat. Ethan took off his jacket, the heavy canvas one he wore to the shop, lined with flannel, stained with years of motor oil, and put it over her shoulders. She didn't protest. She pulled it around herself and walked beside him to the truck, her heels clicking on the pavement, her breath making clouds in the frozen air. They got in the truck. He started the engine. The heater kicked on with its usual reluctance, coughing warm air that smelled faintly of coolant. "Where?" he asked. She didn't answer for a long time. She sat in the passenger seat with his jacket around her shoulders and her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield at a parking meter that had expired. "Home," she said. He drove her to Maplewood Lane. Not to her house, to his. Lily was at school. The house was quiet. Sophia walked in and stood in the living room, still wearing his jacket over her designer clothes, and she looked around at the yellow kitchen and the star-stickered coffee table and the cartoon owl blanket on the couch, and she just stood there. Then she sat down on the floor, not on the couch, not on a chair. On the floor, with her back against the wall, her knees pulled up, her arms wrapped around them. She sat there, and she stared at the opposite wall, and she didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't move. Ethan sat down beside her, on the floor, back against the wall. Same position. They sat like that for almost an hour. At some point she said, "My father would be ashamed of me." "No, he wouldn't. I lost his company." "You didn't lose it. Someone stole it." "I should have seen it coming." "You trusted someone you loved. That's not a failure." "In business it is." "Then business is wrong." She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were red but dry. The burning thing behind them had quieted to something that looked like exhaustion. "You really believe that?" she said. It wasn't a question. I believe that trusting people is hard and necessary, and that anyone who punishes you for doing it isn't worth your time. Marcus would disagree. Marcus is a thief. His opinion doesn't count. Something happened to her face. A micro-expression, there and gone, that might have been the ghost of a smile if it had lasted long enough to grow. They sat on the floor until Lily's bus arrived at 4:15. The front door opened and Lily appeared with her backpack and her usual post-school energy, which operated at roughly the level of a small hurricane. She saw Sophia on the floor, looked at Ethan on the floor, and processed this information with the speed and flexibility that only 7-year-olds possess. "Are we sitting on the floor today?" "Apparently," Ethan said. "Cool." She dropped her backpack, sat down between them, and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I drew a horse at school. Its legs are wrong, but Mrs. Rivera said art is about feelings, not accuracy." Sophia looked at the horse. It had 5 legs and what appeared to be wings. "I think it's beautiful," Sophia said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. Just enough for Ethan to hear. "It's a flying horse," Lily explained. "The extra leg is for balance." "That makes sense." "Most things make sense if you think about them right." Lily leaned against Sophia's arm, casual and trusting, the way she leaned against Ethan during movies. Sophia went very still. Then slowly she put her arm around Lily's shoulders. They sat on the floor for another 20 minutes. Lily talked about school, the horse drawing, and a boy named Marcus. A different Marcus, a second-grade Marcus whose primary offense was cutting in the lunch line. And the irony of the name was not lost on Ethan, though he kept it to himself. That night, after Lily was asleep, Sophia sat at the kitchen table while Ethan made spaghetti. Neither of them had eaten all day. "I need a lawyer," she said. "You don't have one." "I have a corporate attorney. He works for the company, which means he works for the board, which means he works for Marcus. I need someone independent, someone who doesn't owe anyone anything." "I know a guy," Ethan said, and then realized how absurd that sounded. "Not a corporate lawyer. A guy from my neighborhood growing up. Danny Reeves. He does civil litigation now, works out of a strip mall office on Route 4. He's not fancy, but he's smart, and he doesn't take money from people he's afraid of." Sophia looked at him. "A strip mall? Between a nail salon and a tax preparer. And you think he can take on a billion-dollar company? I think he can take on a liar. The billion-dollar part is just context." She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone, and Ethan watched the CEO resurface. Not all the way, not the full armor, but enough. The version of Sophia that solved problems instead of drowning in them. "Give me his number," she said. Over the next several days, the story got worse. Every news cycle brought a new accusation, a new leak, a new anonymous source close to the company who had damning things to say about Sophia Laurent's leadership, her mental state, her fitness to run a corporation. The headlines were brutal. They called her reckless. They called her unstable. They speculated about her personal life, her father's death, her fitness as a leader. Someone leaked a photograph of her leaving a pharmacy with a prescription bag. The internet decided it was evidence of drug abuse. It was sleeping medication, the kind her doctor had prescribed for the sleepwalking. But that distinction didn't trend on social media. Sophia stopped leaving her house. She set up a temporary office in her living room, the pristine chrome and white living room that Ethan had only been inside a handful of times, and worked 18-hour days on the phone, on her laptop, on conference calls with Danny Reeves, who had turned out to be exactly as smart and exactly as unfancy as Ethan had promised. Ethan kept his routine. Work, Lily, dinner, bedtime. The alarm at 1:30. But now the routine included Sophia. She ate dinner at his house every night because she'd stopped feeding herself. She sat on the couch while Lily did homework. She fell asleep sometimes, mid-sentence, her head tipping sideways, her body giving out before her mind allowed it. The sleepwalking got worse. 3 nights in a row, Ethan found her outside. The first time she was in her backyard, standing in the snow in bare feet, whispering financial figures into the dark. The second time, she made it to the end of the block before he caught up. The third time, the worst time, she walked to the front of the elementary school and stood in the parking lot, staring at the building as though she were waiting for someone to come out. He brought her home each time, covered her with blankets, made sure the doors were locked. On the fourth night, he found her in front of Lily's bedroom window. It was during a storm. Sleet and wind, the kind of December weather that felt personal, like the sky had a grudge. Ethan heard the motion sensor click on and got up to check. Through Lily's window, he saw a figure standing in the yard, directly below the glass, face tilted upward. Sophia, barefoot. Nightgown soaked through, trembling so hard he could see it from inside the house. Her lips were moving. He couldn't hear the words through the glass and the wind, but he could see the shape of them, the same phrase, over and over. He went outside. The sleet hit his face like needles. He walked around the house to where she stood, and now he could hear her. I can't lose everything again. I can't lose everything again. I can't lose everything again. Her eyes were open, unfocused, seeing something that existed only in the private theater of her sleeping mind. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers curled slightly, and the sleet collected on her shoulders and in her hair, and she didn't flinch because she wasn't there. Not really. Her body was in Ethan's yard in a December storm, but the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. Some dark room inside herself where everything she feared was happening at once. Sophia, he said softly, come on, let's go inside. She didn't respond. She kept whispering. The sleet kept falling. Upstairs, through the lit window, Lily slept with her face pressed against her pillow and her arm hanging off the bed. Ethan reached out and touched Sophia's hand. Her skin was ice. Not cold. Ice. The kind of cold that meant she'd been out here longer than a few minutes. Come on, he said again, and he guided her gently, one hand on her elbow, steering her around the house and through his back door. She walked with him, pliant and unresisting, still murmuring her loop of words, still somewhere far away. He brought her inside, wrapped a towel around her shoulders, sat her on the couch. Her feet were raw and red from the frozen ground, and he dried them with a clean kitchen towel and pulled wool socks over them, while she sat there, gradually going quiet, the storm inside her winding down as the warmth of the house crept in. She woke up 20 minutes later. She looked at him, looked at the towel around her shoulders, looked at the socks on her feet. His socks, gray wool ones, 3 sizes too big. How bad? She asked. You were outside Lily's window. Her face collapsed. Not slowly, not dramatically, but completely, like a building that had been standing only because nobody had removed the last support beam, and now someone had. I could have scared her, she whispered. She didn't wake up. But I could have. I was standing outside a child's window in the middle of the night. That's... She couldn't finish. She pressed both hands over her face and bent forward until her forehead almost touched her knees. Sophia, I'm dangerous, she said through her hands. Do you understand that? I can't control where I go or what I do, and I was standing outside your daughter's window. You were sleepwalking. You didn't choose to be there. That's exactly the point. I don't choose. I can't choose. My body goes wherever the worst parts of my brain send it, and I have no say in it. What if next time There's not going to be a next time here. We'll figure it out. She dropped her hands. Her eyes were wet, and the look in them was something Ethan had never seen from her before. Not fear, not exhaustion, not the hollow emptiness she carried during the day. This was shame. Bright, sharp, corrosive shame. You should keep your distance from me, she said. Both of you. Until I get this under control. I'm not safe to be around. That's not happening. Ethan, I said no. The word landed hard in the quiet room. Sophia stared at him. Outside, the sleet tapped against the windows like fingers on a drum. You don't get to decide that you're too broken for people to care about, he said. That's not your call. You don't get to look at my daughter, who loves you, and decide she's better off without you because you're going through something terrible. That's not protecting us. That's punishing yourself. Sophia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I watched my wife disappear, he said. Not all at once. Slowly. Piece by piece. And the whole time she kept telling me she was fine, she was managing, I shouldn't worry. She pushed me away because she thought she was protecting me, and all it did was make sure I spent the last 3 months of her life standing on the other side of a door she wouldn't open. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. He pressed them flat against his knees. I'm not standing on the other side of that door again. Not for you. Not for anyone. The room was very still. The sleet had eased to a quiet ticking against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, Lily murmured in her sleep, a soft, unintelligible sound that drifted through the house like smoke. Sophia looked at him for a long time. Her face was wet. Her hair hung in damp strands against her neck. She was wearing his socks and sitting on his couch, wrapped in a towel from his bathroom. And she looked nothing like the woman on the cover of business magazines. She looked like a person. Just a person. Scared and tired and sitting in someone's living room in the middle of the night, trying to decide whether to let herself be helped. "Okay," she said. Her voice was barely there. "Okay? Okay, I'll stay." He nodded. She pulled the towel tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the storm moved on, carrying its noise somewhere else, leaving behind the kind of silence that only exists after everything loud has passed through. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They sat in the quiet house with its yellow kitchen and its cartoon owl blanket, and its bookshelf full of Lily's drawings, and the furnace hummed beneath the floor, and the socks on Sophia's feet were too big, and nothing was fixed, and nothing was resolved, and everything was still falling apart in a dozen directions at once. But she was here, and he was here. And for right now, that was the only thing that mattered. She stayed that night, and the next, and the one after that, not in some grand cinematic gesture of moving in. Nothing was announced or discussed or agreed upon with words. It happened the way most important things happen between people who are both too stubborn and too damaged to say what they actually feel. Gradually, without permission, through the accumulation of small, irreversible facts. The first fact was the toothbrush. Sophia asked to borrow one after falling asleep on the couch for the third consecutive night, and Ethan gave her the spare from the bathroom cabinet, still in its packaging. She left it in the cup next to his. The second fact was the blanket. Lily dragged a quilt from the hall closet and deposited it on the couch one evening, announcing, "This is Sophia's blanket now. It has flowers on it because she looks like a flower person." Sophia, who wore monochrome clothing that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, looked at the quilt, faded cotton, pink and yellow roses, a burn mark on one corner from an iron mishap 3 years ago, and said, "It's perfect." She folded it neatly on the arm of the couch every morning. The third fact was the shoes. A pair of flats appeared by the front door next to Ethan's work boots and Lily's sneakers. Then a pair of slippers. Then a coat on the hook by the kitchen. Nobody talked about it. The arrangement existed in the space between what was said and what was understood, and both Ethan and Sophia seemed content, or at least willing, to leave it there. Christmas came quietly. Ethan had never made a big deal of the holiday, not since Claire. He put up a tree because Lily insisted, and he bought presents he could afford, and he cooked a ham that was slightly dry and mashed potatoes that were slightly lumpy, and they ate at the kitchen table with its mismatched chairs and the centerpiece Lily had made from pine cones and glitter glue. Sophia was there. She brought a bottle of wine and a gift for Lily, a telescope, a real one, not a toy, the kind with adjustable lenses and a tripod, and Lily screamed so loudly when she opened it that Mrs. Huang knocked on the wall from next door to make sure nobody was hurt. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said, watching Lily haul the telescope to the backyard in her pajamas, ignoring the cold entirely. "I wanted to. That's an expensive telescope." "She told me she wanted to see the rings of Saturn. You can't see the rings of Saturn with a toy." He looked at her. She was sitting at the table in one of his sweatshirts, gray, faded, with a logo from a trucking convention he'd attended 4 years ago, and she looked nothing like the woman in the business magazines. Her hair was down, her face was bare. There were circles under her eyes, but they were lighter than they'd been a week ago. She looked like someone who had been underwater for a very long time and had just now broken the surface and was taking her first real breath. "Thank you," he said. "For the telescope?" "For being here." She looked at the table, at the dry ham and the lumpy potatoes and the pine cone centerpiece shedding glitter onto the tablecloth, at the kitchen with its yellow cabinets and its leaky faucet and its refrigerator covered in a 7-year-old's drawings. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," she said, and the words came out unsteady, like she hadn't planned to say them and was surprised to discover they were true. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. They sat at the table and drank wine and listened to Lily in the backyard shouting, "I can see the moon! Dad, the moon is right there!" And something settled between them that was quieter than romance and more durable than attraction. It was the feeling of two people who had each been carrying their weight alone for so long that the simple act of sitting at a table together, doing nothing remarkable, felt like relief. The week between Christmas and New Year's was deceptively calm. Sophia worked from Ethan's kitchen table during the day, her laptop open next to Lily's coloring books, her phone buzzing constantly with calls from Danny Reeves and the handful of board members who hadn't yet turned against her. She was building her case, piece by piece, organizing the evidence she'd pulled from her father's files into something a court could understand. Danny Reeves drove out to the house twice. He was a short man with a receding hairline and a suit that fit him the way a tarp fits a woodpile, technically covering everything but fooling nobody. He spread documents across the kitchen table and ate 3 helpings of Ethan's leftover Christmas ham while explaining the legal strategy in terms that assumed Sophia was already 5 steps ahead of him, which she was. "The good news is you've got the originals," Danny said, pointing at a stack of paper with a fork that still had ham on it. "Marcus can doctor the copies all he wants, but metadata doesn't lie. These emails have timestamps, server records, IP logs. If we can get a forensic auditor to authenticate them, his whole story falls apart." "How long?" Sophia asked. "Forensic audit? 2 months, maybe 3. "I don't have 3 months. The board is voting on my permanent removal in 6 weeks. Danny chewed thoughtfully. "Then we need to move faster. I'll file for an emergency injunction. Argue that the board's suspension was based on fraudulent evidence provided by an interested party. If we can get a judge to pause the vote, it buys us time." "Will it work?" "Honestly, 50-50. Judges don't like getting involved in corporate governance unless the evidence is overwhelming. What we have is strong, but it's incomplete. We need the financial transfers, the ones from Marcus's personal accounts to the shell companies. You said your father had records of those?" "He kept copies of everything. But they're in storage. A facility outside the city. Get them. Marcus may have already... Get them anyway. Even if they're gone, the storage company will have access logs showing who entered the unit and when. If Marcus was there, that's consciousness of guilt." Sophia nodded. She looked tired, not the depleted, hollow exhaustion of a month ago, but the focused tiredness of someone engaged in a fight they hadn't yet lost. Something had changed in her since Christmas. The helplessness was receding. In its place was something harder, sharper. The same intelligence and drive that had built a tech company from nothing, now directed at the man who was trying to steal it. Ethan watched this transformation from the periphery. He didn't understand the legal strategy or the corporate maneuvering or the difference between a forensic audit and a regular audit. But he understood Sophia. He understood that the woman sitting at his kitchen table arguing with a strip mall lawyer over metadata authentication was the same woman who'd stood barefoot in front of his daughter's window whispering about loss, and both versions of her were real, and both needed different things from him. So he made coffee. He kept Lily occupied. He drove to the storage facility on the edge of the city while Sophia was on a conference call and confirmed that her father's unit was still intact, the lock undisturbed. He took photos of the access log, which showed no entries since Sophia's last visit, and texted them to Danny. He did what he could. It wasn't much, but it was something. New Year's Eve arrived without fanfare. Ethan put Lily to bed at 9, which required an elaborate negotiation involving hot chocolate, an extra chapter of the Talking Dog book, and a solemn promise to wake her at midnight, which he had no intention of keeping. When he came back downstairs, Sophia was on the couch with the flowered quilt, her laptop closed for once, a glass of wine in her hand. "She's out," he said. "She bargained hard. She gets that from her mother. Claire once haggled a car salesman down $2,000 and then asked for floor mats on top of it." Sophia smiled. A real one. Not the almost smile he'd gotten used to, not the ghost of one that flickered and vanished. A full, actual smile that changed her entire face. "You talk about her more now," she said. "Claire?" You used to stop yourself, like you'd start a sentence and then remember something and pull back. You don't do that as much anymore. He sat down on the other end of the couch, not as far away as he used to. They'd been drifting closer for weeks, the distance between them shrinking in increments too small to mark, but too consistent to ignore. Lily's therapist said that a couple years ago, he admitted. That I was editing Claire out of conversations because I thought it would hurt less. She said that doesn't work. That you have to let the person exist in your life even after they're gone, or you end up erasing them, and then you're grieving twice, once for the death and once for the memory. Smart therapist. She charges accordingly. Sophia pulled the quilt higher on her lap. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was already setting off fireworks. The early, impatient kind, bottle rockets and sparklers, kids who couldn't wait for midnight. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "What was the worst part? After she died?" Ethan leaned his head back against the couch, stared at the ceiling. The question should have hurt, and it did, a little. The way pressing on a bruise hurts, a dull ache that tells you something happened here, but the worst of it has passed. "The quiet," he said. "The house was so quiet after she died. Lily was 3, and she'd go to bed at 7, and from 7 to whenever I fell asleep, it was just me in this house with no sound. No voice. No one asking me about my day or arguing about what to watch or laughing at something I said that wasn't even that funny. Just nothing." He paused. "I started leaving the TV on all night, not watching it, just having it on, for the noise, because the quiet felt like drowning." Sophia was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between empathy and recognition, like he was describing a place she'd also been to, but by a different road. "I did the same thing," she said quietly. "After my father died, but with work. I filled every minute with meetings, calls, emails, strategy sessions, anything that involved another voice, another demand, another problem I could solve instead of my own. I thought if I kept moving fast enough, the grief couldn't catch me. Did it work? For about 3 months. Then it caught me. And it brought friends. The sleepwalking, the insomnia, the panic attacks I didn't tell anyone about, the feeling that I was standing inside a building that was on fire, but everyone else kept telling me the building was fine." Ethan turned his head to look at her. She was staring at the dark TV screen, the same way she'd stared at it the first time she'd come over and sat on his couch and said nothing for an hour. But she wasn't the same person she'd been that night. Something had shifted in her. Not healed, not fixed, but shifted. Like a bone that had been set wrong and was now being reset, and the process was painful, but the alignment was better. "The building was on fire," he said. "You weren't wrong about that." "I know, but I was wrong about something else." "What?" "I thought I had to put it out alone." The fireworks outside were getting louder. Someone had upgraded from bottle rockets to the real thing, deep booms that rattled the windows and sent flashes of color across the ceiling. "You didn't ask for this," Sophia said. "I want you to know that I understand that. A month ago, you were a mechanic with a daughter and a normal life, and now you're setting alarms at 1:30 in the morning and driving to storage facilities and sitting on your couch with someone else's mess. You didn't sign up for any of it." "No," Ethan said. "I didn't." She looked at him, and he could see her bracing, preparing for the qualification, the retreat, the moment where he gently established the boundaries she'd been expecting since the beginning. "But I'd do it again," he said. "All of it. The 2 a.m. walks, the cold, the floor sitting, the phone calls from Danny with the ham on his fork. I'd do every single part of it again." "Why?" He thought about it, really thought about it. Not the quick instinctive answer, but the real one. The one that lived in the part of him he didn't access very often, because it was where Claire still lived, and it was sacred and private, and he didn't open that door for just anyone. "Because I spent 4 years being Lily's dad and nothing else," he said. "And I was good at that. I was present, and I showed up, and I kept my promises. But I was also disappearing. Slowly, a little every day. I was turning into someone whose whole life was about one other person, and the parts of me that weren't about her, the parts that were just me, Ethan, the guy who existed before all of this. Those parts were going dark." He looked at her. "And then you showed up." With your messed up sleep and your billion-dollar problems and your complete inability to ask for help. And something turned back on. I don't know what to call it. I don't know if there's a word for it, but I was less gone. Every day I spent around you, I was less gone. Sophia's eyes were bright. Not tears, not yet. The stage right before tears, where everything is very close to the surface and the only thing holding it in place is the fragile, stubborn decision not to let go. I don't know how to do this, she said. Whatever this is, I don't know how to be someone who stays. Every relationship I've ever had was transactional. Investors, partners, board members, people who wanted something from me and left when they got it. I don't know how to be with someone who's just here, with no agenda. I don't have an agenda. I know, that's the part I don't know how to handle. A particularly loud firework went off, close enough to shake the house. Down the hall, Lily stirred but didn't wake. You don't have to know how, Ethan said. You just have to not run. She looked at him. He looked back. The distance between them on the couch was about 8 inches. The distance between them in every other way, money, education, background, the entirely different worlds they'd come from, was immeasurable. None of it mattered. Not at midnight on New Year's Eve in a rented house on Maplewood Lane with a sleeping 7-year-old down the hall and a flowered quilt on the couch, and the sound of fireworks through the thin walls. Sophia reached across those 8 inches and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. They were always cold. And they wrapped around his, which were rough and calloused and permanently stained with shop grease no soap could fully remove. She didn't say anything. She held on. He held on back. At midnight, the neighborhood erupted. Every house on the street seemed to have stockpiled fireworks for this specific moment, and the noise was enormous. A rolling, crackling, booming wall of sound that lit up the windows in rapid bursts of red and white and gold. Lily appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. You didn't wake me up, she accused. You're awake now, Ethan pointed out. That's not the same thing and you know it. She saw them on the couch, saw their hands, processed this information with her usual 7-year-old efficiency and said, Finally. Finally what? Ethan asked. Finally you're holding hands. I've been waiting forever. It's been 2 months. That's forever when you're 7. She climbed onto the couch between them, wedging herself into the space with the confidence of someone who had never doubted she belonged there. Sophia lifted the quilt and covered all 3 of them, and they sat there, the mechanic, the CEO, and the 7-year-old who had started all of this with a plate of uneven cookies. And they watched the fireworks through the window, and nobody said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. The first week of January brought a cold so deep the weatherman on the morning news used the word dangerous 4 times in a single forecast. Ethan wrapped the pipes with heat tape the way Sophia had told him to. He stacked firewood on the porch. He checked on Mrs. Wong, who was 81 and claimed the cold didn't bother her, but whose furnace had a habit of shutting off at 3 in the morning. Sophia's case was progressing. Danny Reeves had filed the emergency injunction, and a judge had agreed to review it. The forensic auditor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Kwan, who spoke in numbers the way poets spoke in metaphor, had begun examining the original financial records and had already identified what she called significant anomalies in the accounts Marcus had presented to the board. Significant anomalies, Sophia repeated on the phone, standing in Ethan's kitchen while he made lunch. What does that mean in English? It means someone moved money where it wasn't supposed to go and then tried to cover the trail, Dr. Kwan said, her voice tinny through the speaker. The timestamps on the transfers don't match the authorization logs. Whoever did this was sophisticated but not perfect. There are gaps. Can you prove it wasn't me? I can prove the transfers originated from login credentials that were not associated with your account. That's a start. Sophia hung up and stood by the window, arms folded, staring at the yard where Lily's telescope stood covered in a tarp. A start, she said. A start is better than nothing, Ethan said, slicing bread. A start is what lawyers say when they want more money. Danny's not like that. Danny ate 4 slices of my leftover Christmas ham. He's a growing boy. She turned from the window, and the look on her face was something between frustration and something else, something warmer that he was starting to recognize as the expression she made when the weight she was carrying became slightly less impossible because he was in the room. "I'm scared it won't be enough," she said. "The evidence, the audit, the injunction, what if none of it matters? Marcus has resources. He has connections. He's had 15 years to build relationships with every person who matters in this industry. I've had 14 months. You've also got the truth. The truth doesn't always win, Ethan. No, but liars get tired. The truth doesn't." She stared at him for a long moment, the kind of look that went past the surface and settled somewhere deeper, somewhere he could feel it. "Where do you get this stuff?" she asked. "What stuff?" "These things you say, these plain, simple, annoyingly right things. Do you practice them? Do you have a book?" "It's a gift. It's infuriating. That's also a gift." Her mouth did the thing it had been doing more often lately. The almost laugh that was now, more often than not, an actual laugh. Short, surprised, involuntary. The sound of someone remembering what it felt like to find something funny. She walked over to where he stood at the counter and leaned against him. Not a hug, not an embrace, just a lean. Her shoulder against his arm, her weight shifting slightly into him, the way a tired person leans against a wall. He put down the bread knife and let her stay there. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For making sandwiches while my life falls apart, for not treating me like I'm fragile, for saying annoying things that make me feel less alone." "Anytime." "There you go again." They stood in the kitchen, the furnace hummed, the faucet dripped. Somewhere outside, a snowplow scraped down Maplewood Lane, its blade grinding against the asphalt with a sound like the world clearing its throat. Sophia leaned against him, and he held still, and the sandwiches went unfinished for a while. And that was fine. Some things mattered more than lunch. The injunction came through on a Thursday in the second week of January. Danny Reeves called at 8 in the morning, his voice carrying the particular energy of a man who had been awake since 4 and had consumed enough coffee to power a small generator. The judge had granted the emergency motion. The board's vote to permanently remove Sophia as CEO was frozen pending the outcome of the forensic investigation. Marcus Webb's attorneys had filed an immediate objection, but the judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Stedman, who, according to Danny, had a reputation for despising corporate fraud the way most people despise traffic, had denied it from the bench without even reading it fully. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, Danny told Sophia over speakerphone while Ethan scrambled eggs in the background, that when one party presents doctored financial records and the other party presents originals with verifiable metadata, the court is not inclined to let the board make irreversible decisions based on the doctored ones. Paraphrasing, Sophia repeated. Her actual words were more colorful. I liked her. Sophia hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, not moving, her hands flat on the surface, staring at nothing. Ethan put a plate of eggs in front of her and sat down across the table with his own plate. That's good news, he said. It's a pause, not a win. A pause is more than you had yesterday. She picked up a fork, put it down, picked it up again. If the forensic audit confirms what Dr. Kwan found, the login discrepancies, the unauthorized transfers, the shell accounts, then Danny can file a formal complaint with the SEC. That's criminal, not civil. Marcus wouldn't just lose the company, he'd face prosecution. Good. But if the audit takes too long, or if Marcus destroys evidence, or if the board finds a way around the injunction, Sophia, she looked at him, eat your eggs. She stared at him for 2 full seconds. Then she picked up the fork and ate. They weren't great eggs. Ethan always overcooked them slightly, a flaw he'd inherited from his own father and had never bothered to correct. But she ate all of them. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, assessed the mood at the table with the acute emotional radar that 7-year-olds possess when they want to, and said, Did something good happen? Maybe, Sophia said. Is the bad man going to get in trouble? Ethan and Sophia exchanged a look. Lily knew about Marcus in the vaguest possible terms. She understood that someone at Sophia's work had done something unfair, and that Sophia was trying to fix it. The details had been kept far from her, but children fill in gaps with their own logic, and Lily's logic had categorized the situation with the clarity of a fairy tale. Sophia was the good person, Marcus was the bad person, and bad people eventually got caught because that was how things were supposed to work. We're working on it, Sophia said. Good. He should have to say sorry. I don't think sorry is going to cover it, sweetheart. Then he should have to say sorry twice. Ethan took Lily to the bus stop. When he came back, Sophia was standing in the kitchen with her phone in her hand and an expression he hadn't seen before. Not exhaustion, not fear, not the tight-jawed resolve she'd been wearing for weeks. Something else. Something that looked, from a certain angle, like hope. Cautious, fragile, suspicious hope. The kind that comes after a long stretch of bad news and doesn't quite trust itself to exist yet. I need to go to the storage facility, she said. Today. Doctor, Quan needs the original transfer records from my father's files. If they're still there, we can accelerate the audit. I'll drive you. You have work. I'll call Dale. Ethan, you can't keep missing shifts for... Dale owes me 14 favors. I've been keeping count. She didn't argue. They drove to the storage facility in Ethan's truck, the heater doing its inadequate best against the January cold. The facility was a gray building off the highway, the kind of place that looked like it had been designed to be forgotten. Sophia's father's unit was on the 3rd floor, a 10-by-10 space filled with filing cabinets, cardboard boxes, and the accumulated paperwork of a man who had built an empire and documented every single step. Sophia stood in the doorway for a moment before going in. Her hand rested on the frame, and Ethan could see her fingers tighten slightly, the knuckles going pale. You okay? He asked. This is his handwriting, she said, pointing at a label on the nearest box. Neat block letters, all capitals. Contracts. 2014 to 2016. He labeled everything himself. His secretary offered to do it every year, and every year he said no. He said if you can't organize your own records, you can't run a company. She went in. Ethan followed. They spent 3 hours going through boxes, and Sophia found what she was looking for in the 7th one, a manila folder, thick with documents, labeled WebEB Financials, discrepancies in her father's handwriting. She opened it at the small metal table in the corner of the unit. Inside were bank statements, transfer receipts, account registrations for 3 shell companies, and a handwritten note on her father's personal stationery. The note was brief, 4 sentences. Sophia read it. Then she read it again. Then she sat down on the cold floor and pressed the note against her chest, and the sound she made was not crying. It was something before crying, something deeper, the sound of a person discovering that someone they'd lost had been fighting the same fight they were now fighting and had left behind a map. He knew, she said. My father knew about Marcus. He was gathering evidence. He was building a case, and then he died before he could finish it. Ethan crouched beside her. What does the note say? She held it out. He read it. The handwriting was precise, the same neat block letters as the box labels. Marcus has been moving money since 2019. 3 accounts I can trace, probably more I can't. I'm documenting everything. If something happens to me, Sophia will find this. She always finds everything. That's why I'm leaving it for her. Ethan read it twice. The last 2 sentences hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. The certainty in them. The absolute, unshakable faith of a father who knew his daughter well enough to know that even after his death, she would come looking. She would find the truth. She would finish what he started. He knew you'd come, Ethan said. Sophia pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. He always knew. He always knew everything about me. Every flaw, every strength, every stubborn, reckless thing I would do. And he still believed in me. He was right to. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Let's take everything. All of it. Every box, every document. Danny needs to see all of this. They loaded the truck. 7 boxes. Ethan's Silverado rode low on the way home, the suspension complaining under the weight of 30 years of a dead man's meticulous records. Sophia sat in the passenger seat with the manila folder in her lap, and she didn't speak for most of the drive, and that was fine. Danny Reeves arrived at the house that evening. He looked at the documents. He looked at the handwritten note. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, reading, and when he looked up, his face had changed. This is it, he said. This is the whole thing. Your father didn't just find discrepancies, he traced the entire network. Shell companies, transfer routes, the offshore accounts Marcus used to launder the money back into legitimate investments. It's all here. Is it enough? Sophia, this is enough to end Marcus Webb's career, his freedom, and his reputation in that order. She closed her eyes, opened them, then end it. The next 6 weeks were brutal, methodical, and entirely unglamorous. There was no single dramatic courtroom scene, no sudden confession, no moment where Marcus Webb stood under a spotlight and admitted what he'd done. That happens in movies. In real life, justice moves like a glacier, slow, grinding, and unstoppable once it builds enough momentum. Danny filed the formal complaint with the SEC on January 19th. Dr. Kwan's forensic audit was completed on February 3rd and confirmed every discrepancy Thomas Laurent's notes had identified, plus 11 more that even Thomas hadn't found. The SEC opened a formal investigation on February 10th. Marcus's attorneys filed motions to dismiss, delay, and redirect. Every single one was denied. On February 22nd, federal investigators executed a search warrant on Marcus Webb's home office and personal computers. They found the original login credentials used for the unauthorized transfers. They found drafts of the falsified documents he'd leaked to the press. They found the succession timeline email chain. Not just the one Sophia had discovered, but the entire thread, spanning 3 years, documenting a deliberate, systematic plan to seize control of Laurent Technologies from the moment Thomas Laurent's health began to decline. Marcus Webb was arrested on March 1st at his office. The news covered it extensively. The same reporters who had camped outside Sophia's building 2 months earlier now camped outside Marcus's. The same headlines that had called Sophia reckless and unstable now called her vindicated and courageous. The internet, which had a memory slightly shorter than a goldfish's, pivoted overnight from outrage to admiration, as though the months of accusations and leaked photos and anonymous smears had happened to someone else entirely. Sophia watched the news coverage from Ethan's couch, sitting between him and Lily, the flowered quilt across all 3 of their laps. "He's doing the perp walk," Lily observed, pointing at the screen. "Like on the cop shows you don't let me watch." "You shouldn't be watching this either," Ethan said. "I'm watching it for educational purposes." Sophia said nothing. She watched Marcus Webb walk from the building to the police car, flanked by officers. His face, the carefully neutral mask she recognized because she'd worn one just like it for 14 months. And she felt not satisfaction, not triumph, not the vindication the headlines were already assigning her. She felt tired. She felt done. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, because he always asked, and the question never felt automatic coming from him. "I don't feel how I thought I'd feel," she said. "How did you think you'd feel?" "Happy, relieved, like something heavy had been lifted." "And instead?" She thought about it. On the screen, Marcus was placed in the back of the car. The door closed. The car pulled away. "Instead, I just feel like it's over, like I've been running for so long that I don't know how to stop. My legs are still moving, but there's no finish line left to cross." Lily leaned against Sophia's arm. "You could take a nap," she suggested. "Naps help." Sophia put her arm around Lily and rested her chin on top of the girl's head. "You might be right. I'm usually right. Ask my dad." "She's right about 60% of the time," Ethan said, which, to be fair, is a better average than most adults I know. The formal proceedings took several more months. Marcus Webb was charged with embezzlement, securities fraud, and conspiracy to defraud investors. His bail was set at $4 million. 3 of the board members who had voted to suspend Sophia resigned quietly, their connections to Marcus too well documented to survive public scrutiny. The remaining board issued a formal apology and invited Sophia to return as CEO effective immediately. She said no. Not permanently. Not forever. She said not yet. She called Danny Reeves and told him she needed time. She called the board and told them she'd return when she was ready, on her own schedule, under her own terms. She turned off her phone, closed her laptop, and sat on Ethan's porch in the early March sunlight, watching Lily ride her bicycle in crooked circles on the sidewalk, and she did nothing. For the first time in 14 months, she did absolutely nothing. It lasted about 3 days before the restlessness kicked in. She wasn't built for stillness. Her brain was wired to solve problems the way Ethan's hands were wired to fix engines. And without a crisis to manage, the machinery spun without traction. So she found a different kind of work. She started seeing a therapist, not the corporate-approved executive coach she'd been assigned after her father's death, a pleasant man who specialized in leadership resilience and charged $500 an hour to say things like, "Give yourself grace." But a real therapist, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Amara Osei, who specialized in grief, trauma, and sleep disorders, and whose office was located not in a glass tower but in a converted brownstone with creaky stairs and a waiting room that smelled like chamomile. Dr. Osei didn't tell Sophia to give herself grace. She told her to sit with her discomfort and stop performing recovery for an audience. "You've spent your entire adult life being watched," Dr. Osei said during their third session. "Investors, board members, employees, media. Every reaction you've ever had has been filtered through how it would look to someone else. The sleepwalking is your body's way of processing the things your conscious mind won't let you feel in front of people. So what do I do?" "Feel them, badly, messily, without an audience." Sophia tried. It was uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Not painful, exactly, but awkward, like wearing someone else's shoes. She cried during sessions and felt embarrassed about it. She talked about her father and felt foolish, as though grief should have an expiration date, and hers had long passed. She talked about Marcus and felt rage so intense it frightened her, followed by guilt for feeling rage, followed by frustration at the guilt, a recursive loop of emotions that left her exhausted. But the sleepwalking slowed. The episodes went from 3 times a week to twice, then once, then not at all for an entire 10-day stretch that felt like a ceasefire after a long war. She slept through the night for the first time in over a year on a Tuesday in late March, and she woke up in the morning on Ethan's couch. She'd fallen asleep there again, the flowered quilt pulled to her chin, and she lay still for a moment, disoriented, trying to identify what was different. Then she realized she hadn't moved. She'd stayed exactly where she'd fallen asleep. No wandering, no whispering, no waking up in strange places with no memory of how she'd gotten there. She walked to the kitchen, where Ethan was making coffee in the pre-dawn dark, his hair sticking up on one side, wearing the old t-shirt and sweatpants he slept in. "I slept," she said. He looked at her, took in her face, the confusion, the cautious disbelief, the fragile amazement of someone who had just done something ordinary and found it extraordinary. "Yeah?" "The whole night. I didn't move." He poured her a cup of coffee, set it on the counter in front of her, didn't say anything dramatic, didn't make it into a moment, just handed her coffee, the way he'd done every morning for months now, and the normalcy of it, the sheer, unremarkable ordinariness, was better than any celebration could have been. "Good," he said. She drank the coffee. It was too strong, the way he always made it, and slightly burnt, the way it always was when he used the old percolator instead of the drip machine. She drank all of it. Spring came to Maplewood Lane the way it always did, reluctantly, in stops and starts, with a final snowstorm in mid-April that everyone agreed was unnecessary. The ice melted. The trees budded. Mrs. Huang planted tomatoes along the fence and predicted, as she did every year, that this would be the summer they finally grew properly, which they never did. Sophia returned to Laurent Technologies on the first Monday of May. She walked into the building at 8 in the morning, wearing a suit that fit her like armor and flats instead of heels because she'd decided somewhere between January and now that she was done being uncomfortable for the sake of appearances. The lobby was quiet. No reporters, no cameras, no circus, just employees on their way to their desks, some of whom looked at her and nodded, and some of whom looked at her and quickly looked away, and all of whom knew the story because everyone knew the story. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. Her assistant, the same woman who had tried to stop Ethan in his coveralls 4 months earlier, was at her desk. "Good morning, Ms. Laurent." "Good morning, Janet." "There's coffee in your office, and the board has requested a meeting at 10. Tell them I'll be there at 10:30. 10:30? Yes, ma'am." Sophia walked into her office, closed the door, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city below. The same view she'd looked at 1,000 times. The same skyline, the same traffic, the same world spinning on the same axis it always had. But she was different in it now. She could feel the difference in her bones, in her posture, in the way her hands hung relaxed at her sides instead of clenching into fists she hid in her pockets. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and before she did anything else, she drafted a memo to the entire company. The memo announced the creation of the Laurent Foundation for Employee Well-Being, a fully funded program providing free mental health services, grief counseling, burnout support, and sleep disorder treatment to every employee and their families. The program would be administered independently, entirely confidential, and available immediately. At the bottom of the memo, she wrote a single paragraph that wasn't about policy or structure or funding. It was personal. I spent the last year pretending I was fine when I wasn't. I did this because I believed that admitting struggle was the same as admitting failure, and that a leader who needed help wasn't fit to lead. I was wrong. The strongest thing I've ever done wasn't building this company or surviving what nearly destroyed it. It was letting someone see that I was falling apart and accepting their hand when they offered it. If you're struggling, you're not broken. You're human. And this company will never again be a place where being human is treated as a weakness. She sent it. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the quiet office and breathed. The board meeting at 10:30 was tense but productive. 3 new members had replaced the ones who'd resigned, and they were cautious, deferential, clearly aware that the woman sitting at the head of the table had just survived something that would have destroyed most executives and had come back with federal prosecutors on her side. Sophia laid out her conditions for continuing as CEO: full transparency and financial reporting, independent quarterly audits, a restructured board with no ties to Marcus Webb's network, and a corporate ethics office reporting directly to her. "These aren't suggestions," she said. "These are requirements. If anyone at this table has a problem with them, this is the time to say so." Nobody said anything. "Good. Let's get to work." She left the office at 6 o'clock. Not 10, not midnight. 6. She drove herself. She'd sold the town car, let the driver go, and was using her own vehicle now. A modest sedan that she'd bought because it had good safety ratings and because Lily had approved of its color, which was blue. She pulled into the driveway on Maplewood Lane, and as she walked to the front door, she saw Lily's face in the window, watching for her the way Lily used to watch for Ethan. The door opened before she reached it. "How was your first day back?" Lily asked. "Long, good, scary. Were the people nice?" "Some of them." "Were you the boss?" "I was the boss." "Cool. Dad's making tacos. He's putting too much cheese on them again." "There's no such thing as too much cheese," Ethan called from the kitchen. Sophia walked into the house. She set her bag on the hook by the door, next to Ethan's work jacket and Lily's school backpack. She kicked off her flats and put on the slippers that lived by the front door, the ones Lily had picked out for her, with ridiculous fuzzy lining and rubber soles. She walked into the kitchen, where Ethan stood at the counter, grating cheese onto a mountain of tortillas, and she stood next to him, and he leaned over and kissed the side of her head without stopping what he was doing, and the casualness of it, the routine of it, was the most extraordinary thing she had ever experienced. They ate dinner. Lily talked about a science project involving vinegar and baking soda and an eruption that had gone mostly according to plan, except for the part where it got on the ceiling. Ethan talked about a transmission rebuild that had taken him 6 hours and would have taken 4 if the previous mechanic hadn't stripped every bolt in the housing. Sophia talked about her first day back, editing out the tense parts, keeping the funny ones, giving Lily the version of the story that a 7-year-old could hold without being weighed down by it. After dinner, Lily insisted on setting up the telescope in the backyard. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, and she'd been waiting for a night like this. "Can you see Saturn yet?" Sophia asked, crouching beside her. "Not yet, but I can see Jupiter. It's the bright one." "How do you know it's Jupiter?" "Because it doesn't twinkle. Stars twinkle. Planets don't. Mrs. Rivera taught us that." "Mrs. Rivera is very smart." "She's okay. She marked me wrong on a spelling test for writing believe instead of believe, and I think that's harsh." Ethan stood on the back porch watching them. 2 figures in the dark yard, huddled over a telescope, their breath making clouds in the cool May night. Lily's voice carried across the grass, excited and relentless, explaining the difference between planets and stars with the authority of someone who had learned this information approximately 48 hours ago and now considered herself an expert. And Sophia, listening. Not performing interest, not indulging a child, but actually listening. The way she listened to everything Lily said, with her full attention, as though the words coming out of a 7-year-old's mouth were as important as anything said in a boardroom. He thought about the night he'd found her on the bridge. The bridge. He hadn't talked about it, not to anyone, not even to Sophia. It lived in a part of his memory that he'd sealed off the way you seal off a room in a house after something terrible has happened in it. The ice. The wind. The way her feet had been positioned, her toes hanging over the edge of the railing, her body swaying in the storm. The fraction of a second between her footing slipping and his hand closing around her arm. The weight of her pulling against his grip, gravity and ice conspiring to take her down into the black water below. The police headlights approaching from the far end of the bridge. The sound she'd made when she woke up. A gasp, raw and terrified. The sound of someone surfacing from a nightmare and finding the nightmare was real. He'd caught her. He'd held on. The officers had helped pull them both back, and she'd collapsed against him on the frozen bridge, shaking so hard it felt like her bones would come apart, and he'd held her and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would undo the last 30 seconds. That night had changed something in both of them, not in a way either of them discussed, but in the way they moved around each other afterward, more carefully, more deliberately, with a specific awareness of people who now understood exactly how close they'd come to losing everything. He'd set the alarm for 1:30 every night since then, even after the sleepwalking stopped, even after weeks had passed without an episode. The alarm went off and he checked, and she was always where she was supposed to be, on the couch under the flowered quilt, or eventually, later, after weeks of gravity pulling them closer, beside him. And each time the relief was the same. Fresh. Specific. The relief of a man who knew what the alternative looked like. "Dad," Lily called from the yard. "Come look! Jupiter has stripes!" He walked down the porch steps and crossed the grass to where they crouched by the telescope. Sophia moved aside to let him look, and when he bent to the eyepiece, he saw it. A bright disk with faint horizontal bands, impossibly far away, impossibly clear. "See the stripes?" Lily said. "I see them. Those are storms. Big ones. Like hurricanes, but way bigger. Mrs. Rivera said some of them have been going for hundreds of years." "Hundreds of years of storms," Ethan said, straightening up. "Yeah, but the planet is still there. It just keeps going." He looked at Sophia over Lily's head. She looked back. And in the dark yard, with Jupiter hanging in the sky above them, and their daughter, because that's what Lily was now, theirs, in every way that mattered, crouched between them, something passed between Ethan and Sophia that didn't need words. It was the look of two people who had been through their own 100-year storms and were still here, battered, changed, standing in a yard that wasn't much, looking at a sky that was everything. Lily went to bed at 9. Ethan read her 2 chapters of the Talking Dog book, which had become a talking dog and cat book in the latest installment, introducing a rivalry that Lily found deeply compelling. "The cat is mean, but she has reasons," Lily said, yawning. "People are mean because of reasons. Even Marcus." Ethan looked at her. Sometimes his daughter said things that landed in his chest and stayed there. "That's a smart way to think about it," he said. "I know. Good night, Dad." "Good night, kid." He turned off the light, walked downstairs. Sophia was on the couch, the flowered quilt on her lap, a book in her hands that she wasn't reading. "She's out," he said. "She asked me today if I was going to keep living here." Ethan sat down. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know," which was a lie. "What's the truth?" She set the book down, looked at him. The woman who had built a tech empire, who had survived betrayal and public humiliation and a frozen bridge at 2 a.m, who had clawed her way back from the edge of everything. That woman looked at a mechanic in a rented house on Maplewood Lane, and her face held nothing back. No mask, no armor, no calculated composure. Just her. "The truth is that my house next door has been empty for 3 months, and I haven't thought about it once. The truth is that I have a penthouse downtown that I've been paying rent on since September, and I couldn't tell you what color the walls are. The truth is that I rebuilt my entire company, and the thing I was most excited about today was coming home to watch your daughter look at Jupiter through a telescope. She paused. The truth is that I'm already home. I've been home for months. I just didn't want to say it out loud because saying it makes it real, and real things can be taken away. Ethan leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, looked at the coffee table with its star stickers and its ring marks from mugs, and its one wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix. Real things can be taken away, he said. I know that better than most people. Claire was real, and she was taken away, and it nearly destroyed me. And for a long time after that, I didn't want anything real again, because the risk was too high. He looked at her. But then a 7-year-old made some terrible cookies and brought them to your door, and you said they were perfect. And something in my chest moved for the first time in 4 years. And I thought, okay, maybe the risk is worth it. Maybe the only thing worse than losing something real is never having it. Sophia's eyes were bright. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't turn away or press her hands over her face or fold her arms against the feeling. She just sat there and let it happen. And that, more than anything, more than the injunction, more than the arrest, more than the board meeting, more than all the battles she'd won, was the bravest thing she'd ever done. So stay, Ethan said, not because you need to, not because you're broken and this is where you heal. Stay because this is your home, because Lily is your family, because He stopped, swallowed. Ethan Brooks was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who fixed trucks and made slightly burnt toast and set alarms at 1:30 in the morning. But some things required words, even from people who preferred actions. Because I love you, he said, and I think I've loved you since you stood in my kitchen and told me my eggs weren't great, but you ate them anyway. And I'll keep making bad eggs and burnt toast and too strong coffee every morning for as long as you'll let me. Sophia laughed, a real laugh, full and surprised and a little broken at the edges, the kind of laugh that comes when you're crying at the same time and don't care who sees it. Your eggs are terrible, she said. I know. And your coffee could strip paint. I've been told. And this couch has a spring that pokes me in the back every night. I'll fix it. Don't. I'm used to it. She reached over and took his hand, the same way she'd taken it on New Year's Eve, her cold fingers wrapping around his rough, calloused ones, holding on with a grip that was stronger than it looked. I'll stay, she said. That was it. No grand gesture, no orchestral swell, no perfectly lit cinematic moment. Just two people on a second-hand couch with a flowered quilt and a wobbly coffee table, in a house with yellow cabinets and a leaky faucet and walls covered in a child's drawings, saying the simplest, hardest, most terrifying thing two people can say to each other. I'm here. I'm not leaving. This is enough. Months later, on a warm night in late summer, Ethan woke at 1:30. Not from the alarm. He'd turned it off weeks ago, after the sleepwalking had been gone for so long that checking felt like a habit rather than a necessity. But his body remembered the rhythm, and some nights it pulled him awake anyway, as though the worry had been etched into his bones and would take a long time to fade. He rolled over. Sophia's side of the bed was empty. The old fear spiked, a cold electric jolt that went from his stomach to his chest in less than a second. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, moving down the hallway, checking the rooms, the kitchen, the front door. He found her in the doorway of Lily's room. She was standing with one hand on the frame, looking in. Lily was asleep, sprawled across the bed in her usual geometry. One arm hanging off the side, one leg bent at an angle that defied anatomy, her face pressed into the pillow. The nightlight cast a soft glow across the room, illuminating the rock collection on the dresser, the telescope in the corner, the drawing of a 5-legged horse taped to the wall. Ethan came up behind Sophia. His heart was still hammering, and the adrenaline was still in his blood, but as he got closer, he could see her face, and the fear dissolved. She was awake, not sleepwalking, not trapped in some unconscious loop of grief and terror. Awake and calm, and standing in the doorway of their daughter's room with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was peace. Not the temporary, conditional kind that comes between crises. The real kind. The kind that settles into a person's bones and stays there. Not because everything is perfect, but because enough is enough. And enough is more than she ever thought she'd have. "Hey," he said softly. She looked at him. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. Old habit." "The 1:30 alarm?" "My body still does it sometimes." She looked back at Lily. "I had a dream. Not a bad one. I dreamed about my father. He was in his garage, building something, circuit boards and wires everywhere. And Lily was there handing him tools. They were arguing about which screwdriver to use." "Who won?" "Lily. Obviously." He stood beside her in the doorway. Their shoulders touched. In the room, Lily murmured something in her sleep and rolled over, pulling the blanket with her. "He would have loved her," Sophia said. "Yeah, he would have. And Claire, would she have—" Sophia stopped. This was a question she had never asked before, and she asked it carefully, the way someone handles something fragile that belongs to someone else. Would she have been okay with this? With me being here? Ethan thought about it. He thought about Claire, the real Claire. Not the photo on the bookshelf, but the woman who could whistle with 2 fingers and talk a cop out of a speeding ticket and burn oatmeal in ways that defied science. He thought about what she would say if she could see him now, standing in a hallway at 1:30 in the morning with a woman who had come into his life sideways and stayed. She would have said it's about time, he said, and then she would have told you your shoes were great and asked if you wanted to split a bottle of wine. Sophia smiled. The real one. The one that changed her whole face. I wish I could have met her. She's here, Ethan said. She's in every drawing on that wall. She's in the way Lily argues and the way she whistles and the way she walks into a room like she owns it. Claire's not gone. She's just distributed. Distributed. I'm a mechanic, not a poet. You're better than a poet. Poets overcomplicate things. They stood in the doorway for a while longer. Then Sophia took his hand, and they walked back to the bedroom, and he climbed into bed, and she climbed in beside him, and the house was quiet except for the furnace and the faucet, and Lily's soft breathing down the hall. Ethan, Sophia whispered in the dark. Yeah? You're home now. You don't have to fight alone anymore. His own words, the ones he'd whispered to her 100 times during those long, terrible nights when the sleepwalking was at its worst, and she'd wake up confused and frightened in some part of the house she didn't remember walking to. She'd kept them. She'd carried them. And now she was giving them back. Neither do you, he said. She shifted closer. Her cold feet found his warm ones under the blanket. Her hand rested on his chest, over the heartbeat that had been keeping time for 32 years, steady and unremarkable and still going. Outside, the stars hung over Maplewood Lane, the same way they'd hung over it when Ethan moved in with a baby and a broken heart, and no plan beyond surviving each day. The same sky. The same street. The same small house at the end of it, with its leaning fence and its yellow kitchen and its front door that had been opened to a stranger carrying cookies. And through that opening, everything had changed. Not perfectly, not easily, not without cost, but completely. And in the quiet house, in the room down the hall, a 7-year-old girl slept with her arm hanging off the bed and a drawing of a 5-legged horse on her wall, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream about, rude fish maybe, or planets with 100-year storms, or the particular unreasonable magic of a life that keeps going, keeps turning, keeps finding its way to something that looks, from a certain angle, a lot like home.